Hello and welcome to Property Perspectives. Today I have with me Ian Rogers. Ian has got vast experience in both large and small scale property development and he's some very strong views on how to ensure that any development project is successful. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So welcome Ian. And firstly, could you tell us a little bit about your background and your experience?
Sure, no problem. Well, I was effectively born into construction because my father had a small building company in Guildford where I was raised. So I was on construction sites in the days when I could, from probably about the age of 11 or 12. Can't do that today. So I grew up with proper tradesmen and learning what construction was all about. I then became a chartered quantity surveyor and worked on a lot of larger commercial projects on the contractor side of the fence. I then, probably in the early 90s, moved into facilities management, which is all about operational buildings, looking after buildings, maintenance, cleaning, catering, and all that sort of thing. And then I got involved in the ubiquitous private finance initiative type work, which meant that we had to look at the whole life cycle of a building. So it brought back my construction experience and the operational facilities management experience, and looking at the end game as to what was needed to operate that building efficiently right at the beginning, because the company involved in doing those projects was involved for the whole concession period with repairing and replacing any capital equipment, etc. So we had to know exactly what was going on in the whole life cycle of the building. So it got me involved with the designers as to cost benefit analysis and all that sort of thing. So now I run my own consultancy business, and I also do coaching and training in this field. So we're looking at how to best optimize a building for its whole life cycle, and primarily looking at the beginning of a project to make sure it's defined correctly at the beginning.
That's excellent. Thanks, Ian. And from your experience then, with all these development projects that you've worked on, what are the most common causes of project failure?
Well, in my opinion, it starts from the client not really knowing what they really want at the end game in terms of how to operate, or if you're a speculative developer, how your potential tenants or users are going to use that building. And that comes to realization as you go through, oh, we need this, oh, we need that. And that then leads to variations and extra costs and disputes and everything else, all because they haven't been crystal clear at the very beginning. And I've come across innumerable examples of things like this all the way through my career. For instance, a hospital I was involved in, they didn't put any storage cabinets or storage rooms in for medical equipment or linen or vital equipment that was needed at critical times during the day. A whole host of other examples. The classic often is cleaners' cupboards or storage cupboards not being put in place, so you haven't got the right facilities to put your equipment away. When it comes to housing, looking at housing, how it's going to operate. These days, people have bikes and things like that. So if it's a shared tenancy house, where they're going to put their bikes. Inevitably, they bring it into their room, which damages the room and causes all sorts of things in the common parts. So it's being sensible about looking at your building at the beginning and trying to avoid some of these pitfalls, which are often not looked at properly right at the very beginning.
Right, so it really does start right at that beginning and getting that specification correct to start with. So what can be done then right from the outset to ensure that these kinds of issues are avoided? So if we were talking about, as you said, I mean, using that example of a house for multiple occupancy, maybe even things for like serviced accommodation or furnished holiday lets. What do we need to do if we're going to develop these kinds of things? What do we need to do right from the outset?
We need to be crystal clear on what we're trying to achieve. And that is multiple facets, if you like. So firstly, we need to understand what the market wants. So I've just looked at a conversion of a large B&B place in the UK. And the person there tried to cram as many rooms into that facility as possible. I think about 15, 16 rooms. Now, some of those rooms were literally not much bigger than a single bed and a cupboard. And you start to think, well, are you actually going to let that out? Is that going to maximize your return? Or would it be better to have a bigger room with double bed in there, so you've still got 2 occupants, but you've got a higher quality room and more likely to let it? So you're looking at your longer term lettability, if you like, from the marketplace. What is the demand for such facilities? And in this day and age, the new world, if you like, people are working from home a lot more, even if it's on a part-time basis. So has that room got the ability to have a small desk that you can work in comfort at home? Those sorts of things. So you're maximizing the ability to rent it and maximize the rental return as well. Because a lot of landlords, in my opinion, they just think, oh, I just need to maximize the rental, but without presenting the right type of product in the first place, and therefore they can't rent it. And they may have to lower it, but often they don't, and therefore they've got void property all the time. Whereas if you're providing what is really needed for the tenants, then you're much more likely to let that room. So it's looking at those sorts of things, looking at the whole ambience of the building to make sure it's durable, make sure that your maintenance is not going to be high through heavy traffic with multiple people in the room, looking at your energy efficiency and all of those sorts of things. And then, as I say, looking at things like bicycle storage and car parking and what have you, to make sure that that property is viable right from the very beginning. So it's setting that out as the developer before you've even got your design team involved. When a lot of people go to the architect to draw this out, well, often in my experience, and I'm not knocking architects, but they don't necessarily understand the operational needs of a building. They make it look nice and pretty and all that sort of thing, but often there's things missing because they don't think about the operational requirements.
So it's having a clear view as to the way that building will be used and operated during its lifetime.
Yeah, very much so. Right from the very, very beginning. I mean, I call this a project initiation document. And for those of you that are familiar with the Prince2 project management principles, it comes from that. And I've, through my experience of looking at whole life cycle, I've developed that on into a much more robust approach that I pick all of these sorts of things up. And we even start with the vision and purpose of the project, so that people get clarity as to why they're doing this and what they're doing it. I mean, in my opinion, a lot of clients, they don't even think about the why. Why are they actually doing this development? Is it for the good of the nature? Is it the good of the community? Is it the good of their back pocket in terms of the returns? There could be all sorts of reasons, but they don't actually know when you ask that question.
So this project initiation document, I mean, what kind of things would you include in that document, Ian?
Well, there's many things. As I say, I'll start off with the vision and purpose and the objectives, and then really start to hone in very carefully on what is required in that building. Now, if it's a conversion to an HMO, then you need to specify what you need in there for meeting all the regulations, all the fire regulations, all of that sort of thing. But more importantly, what you're trying to create with the room space. Are you trying to get in there double bed and a desk and sufficient wardrobe space, so that when you come to design that room, there is sufficient space for that person to live reasonably comfortable in their own space, with an armchair or something like that, even though you've probably got a common area. Some people like to just lock themselves away for a few hours in peace and quiet on themselves. So it's giving them that whole ambience, if you like, to look at that. And then it's going through the budgets, making sure that you've got the right costings in there, looking at, and this at the early stage, obviously going to be very global, but making sure you've got an outline costing of that conversion, so that when you put it into your financial model in terms of income, you've got the right returns once you've got your operating costs and you've taken all of that into account. And again, many instances I've looked at a development, and when you look at the whole life cost of the building, how much it's going to cost to run, energy these days is ever increasing, all of those sorts of things. Have you taken that fully into account when looking at, say, an HMO, so that your returns are actually there? And what is the real marketable rental rate? Often agents will say it's, I don't know, £500 a room, whereas reality, it's actually probably nearer to £400 a room. Well, that's got a significant impact on your returns. and actually may not make that project viable.
Yeah.
But people just think about, oh, I'll just do this as a cheap construction cost at the beginning, and don't necessarily look at the wider implications of what they're looking at and whether this is viable in this format in the first place.
So this concept then of looking at this property over its lifetime. So what is this going? How is this going to operate over its lifetime? What is it going to do?
Yeah.
What are the costs going to be to do? Because I mean, I think you mentioned that, say using that example, say of an HMO, where you've got the high traffic areas, then understanding that those areas, understanding what they are, then that may require a different level of, I don't know, say flooring, of wall covering, to avoid any the renovation again and the replacement during a period.
I mean, it's a slightly larger scale, but the principle's the same. I mean, I was involved in a lot of police stations, and we all know what police officers are like. You know, they're big burly guys with uniforms rushing in and out, etc., doing their duty. And the specification for this particular building was a matte emulsion on the walls. Well, within a year, those walls are wrecked because they've got these guys in their dirty uniforms and what have you brushing up against them. The walls look shabby, so we had to repaint them. Now, if that had been thought about up front, and it's exactly the same principle in the corridors and communal spaces of an HMO, for instance, if that had been done in an oil-based eggshell, every time it gets grubby, you just wash it off.
Yeah.
So it costs a little bit more up front, but it makes the building look nicer and it lasts so much longer. You'll get 3 or 4 times the duration out of that with just some washing down and keeping it fresh that way, and having to constantly repaint with cheaper emulsion, which is going to cost you more in the long term, and it disrupts the tenants.
Yeah, so regardless really of what kind of property that you're operating, so even if it was, say, serviced accommodation or a furnished holiday let, it's understanding how that property is going to operate, where the high traffic areas are, how it's going to be used. Having a clear idea over the life of that particular property could save you an awful lot of time and money.
Yeah, very much so. But it's also important in terms of getting it right in the first place throughout the whole construction period. I mean, I've got a term of 7 deadly sins as to why construction projects fail. And I know that's probably what we were going to go on to, but I've just mentioned that now. But there are 7 areas which all come out of not getting this right in the first place. And in no particular order, this sort of covers things like scope creep, because people haven't thought things through. So they add extras in, which means the contractor puts a claim in for extra money and all of that sort of thing, which may not be in the budget, may not then make the project affordable. And inevitably that makes that variation more expensive than if it had been included in the first place. That could lead to excessive change orders, which then could lead to delays, which could lead to disputes and all sorts of things like that.
And the contractor walking off the site.
Yeah. Or not having a tight enough specification so that the contractor starts dictating what's going on if you're using contractors, or if you're managing it through a series of labour-only organisations. It's still the same principle. So they start dictating what they want to do. And as we all know, contractors want to try and build it as cheaply as possible. So they'll dictate to you what's going on, and you, again, don't get what you really need out of it. Often, I say, bless them again, architects will put in impractical designs so that you can't get at equipment easily to maintain it, or get onto the roof easily if you've got equipment up there for whatever reason. And it becomes impractical to use the building because of those designs. You know, if it's a new build, I mean, they may put a glass curtain wall on the southern facade. Well, that's going to be impractical in the summer because of all the heat gain, unless you put expensive glass in. Simple things like this need to be thought through. And then people don't look at the overall scheduling. I just want it done as quickly as possible. And they haven't scheduled in sufficient time to do the work properly, so that they haven't taken into account the bridging loan or the original construction loan, maybe longer, more interest costs and all of that sort of thing. And they haven't got the cash flow early enough to start paying back the debt. And you may have productivity problems because you haven't thought about this particular type of product that you're using has got specialist labor that are not available for the next 6 months. You know, all of these things start to impact on the building. And then you've got the final one, which starts from the very beginning, which is communication and documentation. It's all fine and dandy. And I've just done a commentary on a post on LinkedIn. Contracts are all fine and dandy, but they don't solve the problems. It's all about communication all the way through from the very beginning, and everybody communicating what's going on and how it's going on, including the contractor being honest in terms of issues he's got with potential delays.
Yeah, so that project initiation document can be a very, very strong, it's almost like the foundation, isn't it, on which you're going to then build the rest of the project. It enables you to communicate. You can talk to an architect, a designer, an interior designer about the use of the building, what it's going to be used for, how it's going to be used. And it gives a much clearer idea as to what that end result is going to be.
Yeah, and often that means that the landlord or developer will make more money in the long term, because they've got cheaper running costs. They've potentially got higher rent because there's some unique elements in that property that are not available elsewhere and yet are in high demand in the marketplace. So if you've got that, and I mean, I've done this myself. I've got a rental flat which we used to rent out to students in Central Europe, and the student accommodation there was very, very poor. So we spent a bit of extra money and we put a little bit higher quality furnishings in there. We didn't fill it to the density that the normal halls of residence were doing, and we made sure that each occupant of the building had a little study desk. Well, in the 12 years that we've been running that, we've never had a void. And we've never had to advertise that building either, more importantly. So when students come to the end of their course, they're so happy that they recommend people that they've met or forward let it for us. And we've always got a queue of people wanting to come into this building because it's slightly cut above the rest that's available in the marketplace, even though we're renting it for the same price. But the demand is there, so we never have the void. So overall, we're making money at it.
Yeah, and the condition of the building, the way it's decorated, survives the student life.
Yeah. I mean, in the early days, we put in some cheap carpet and painting and what have you, because that's all our budget allowed. Fortunately, it did last longer than anticipated. But that could have been a nightmare in terms of having to replace that with the 6 tenants in a building. So, I mean, we've now refurbished it fully and put in proper hard-wearing laminate flooring and all that sort of thing, which again has raised the whole profile of the building. And we've changed the lettings, how we do it now, but it is still being done on word of mouth. We've never had to, or very rarely have we ever had to advertise that, which is, again, a saving in operational cost.
Yeah. So it is,
and the other advantage there is if somebody's putting somebody in, they're more likely to be somebody that they want to co-share with and get on, which means they're going to look after the building better as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve. I think that's really, really, really useful. So, I mean, again, you've got a fair amount of material on the website. So are you happy for me to put your website details into the comments at the bottom, so people can access it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no problems with that.
All right. Well, great. I think this has been really useful and it's been very, very valuable. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask Ian, then post them into the comments below the video and I'll make sure that Ian gets to see them. And as I've said, I'm going to put Ian's contact details and his website into the comments as well. So if you want to contact him direct, you can do so. So thanks very much for watching this video, and I hope you found it useful, and we'll see you again soon.